Okay, hello everyone. Thank you guys for coming. Thank you so much for coming because I realize it's like the end of the second day and it's really hard to motivate yourself to come to like the last talk. So I'm here. My name is Morgan Lawrence. I'm one of the ORISE climate change for the USDA Northwest Climate Hub. I also have my little notes here and just to let you know. So I'll be reading my notes sometimes. Like one of those people who can just, spitball off the top of my head. But so today is why climate literacy for Alaskan producers, and what we do at the hub to make that part. Please. Yeah, and I did want to just tell you a little bit about myself before I launch talk. In Montana, in Western Montana, in the small in the Bitterroot Valley, and I grew up on an apple orchard with 70 trees, and so agriculture, climate change, all of this stuff is really near and dear to my heart. So thank you. So to start this presentation out, I wanted to just probably done poll everywhere. Just do a poll. And I'm pleasantly surprised with how many people are here actually. So how we do this is you can take your phone and go to your little camera thing and you can scan this QR code. And then a little, there's a little yellow thing that'll pop up, take you to the website. Or you can go to pollev.com/Northwest NW Climate Hub 877, or you can and you can't really see the whole question here, but maybe could you scroll down on that a little bit so they can see? Oh, it might not do it. I'll just tell you the question. Sorry. No, you're good. So when you think of climate change and agriculture in Alaska, what one word do you think of? And this should hopefully come up with a word cloud. We'll see if it works. But so when you think of climate change and agriculture in Alaska, what one word do you think of? All harvest is what you're primarily interested in. When you think of climate change in Alaska, what do you think of? Get that. Interesting. So what's everyone else seeing? Are they seeing this question or a different question? Great. Okay. Well, we're just going to do this old fashioned then. You guys are interested in think of climate change and agriculture in Alaska. What words do you think of? Yeah. Wind. Interesting. Okay.
High tunnels.
High tunnels. Awesome. Wind, high tunnels. Unpredictable. Yes. Permafrost. Wet.
Growing degree days.
Growing degree days. Yeah, we're going to talk about that a little bit. Adapt. Love that one. Anything? Scorching hot summer days. Yeah, there are some. That's for sure. I actually like that better than our little poll everywhere. It was going to be really cool because there were going to be all these words up here, but right, we don't need that. We have voices. Those are great responses. I think they're pretty reflective of sort of the of climate change in Alaska and the different ways that people change in Alaska, depending on what their job is, where they live. Is a massive place. Climate change affects each place in Alaska really. I think that's what I was going to do for. Let's go to our next one. Yes, now I'm going to talk about how it is and how we sort of fit into this climate change in Alaska situation. So we're a network of climate change scientists and communicators. We serve Idaho, Oregon, and Washington. And one of our main goals is to bring climate science and solutions to farmers, wild harvesters, foresters, land, just everyone basically is our audience. And our work revolves around identifying and addressing climate vulnerabilities. We do a lot of building climate solutions, strengthening environmental justice, literacy, and training. And those literacy and training efforts are what I'm going to really talk to you guys about today. But just for a little broader context, the Climate Hub is housed within the USDA. We're shared, I guess I would say, between Agricultural Research Service and the Forest Service. So we kind of try to serve those different agencies the strongest, but we're a USDA entity, so we serve kind of all, which is why we have such a wide audience, really. So getting into climate literacy, and why does it matter? So climate literacy basically just means that someone understands how climate change could affect, and also how their lives and actions affect climate change generally. So a climate literate person understands their influence on climate and the climate's influence on them, their production or harvest, and society at large. So why is it important for people to be climate literate? We have our own answers for that, but I like to think, so I used to fight wildfire for 4 years. I did in the American West, and I like to think of the sort of metaphor of an impending wildfire. And if you know piece of property and you know that wildfire, that your property, you can make a lot of adjustments to your property so that it's safer. If a wildfire, you can clean your gutters, you can get a metal roof, you can make sure that your property is fire-wise. If you buy a property and you don't know what the impact of a wildfire could have on your property, and you just buy it blind, and go into a wildfire blind, the likelihood property is going to be, you and your property are going to be negatively affected by a wildfire skyrockets. So this is like an example of why I think just knowing about the impacts of climate change, knowing that climate change could come, and knowing how to adapt to climate change, knowing that there are adaptation options, it's really important. It gets for what is definitely already in and will be coming to Alaska due to climate change. Yeah, and it also encourages people to act on climate change. The more they know about it, the more they're likely to kind of get ready for it. It's especially important for, I wonder if especially important for Alaskan producers and wild harvesters. You guys have probably heard this at this conference a million times, but Alaska have the highest food insecurity rates in the nation. Not all parts of Alaska, but parts of it. And then this is because most of the food that's consumed in the state, that's bought in the state, is imported. I'm not sure that number. I don't know. Yeah, I've heard mixed things about it, but yeah, so a lot of it is imported. And because a lot of that food is really vulnerable to disruption from storms, a lot of you probably recognized in the COVID pandemic, and other events that could be worsened by climate change. So we all rely on agriculture and wild harvest in Alaska and throughout the United States. So really important that producers are prepared for the impacts of climate change, particularly here where food security is high. And we want to, everyone's been talking about improving food security, awesome. I love to hear that. But one of the main sort of this is preparing for climate change, because it's going to have a lot of impacts on food security. Yes. Now we're going to go into some of those impacts, some of the climate change impacts in Alaska. So Alaska really is at the forefront of climate change, and temperatures are rising at 2 to 3 times the rate of the global average. And I think I have some, yeah, and that's largely due to human-caused climate change. In fact, for the period 1950 to 2017, 75% of the annual average warming in Alaska can be attributed to greenhouse gas emissions. So it's pretty enormous. So the rapid warming that Alaska is experiencing has a lot of different impacts, but one of these impacts is changing precipitation patterns. So it depends on the part of Alaska you're in, but we're seeing a lot more precipitation follows rain than snow, which has major impacts on pretty much everything. Let's see. Less snow can also cause changes in water availability, which really affects agriculture and wild harvest alike, fishing, all sorts of stuff. Climate change is also affecting the cryosphere, water part of the Earth system. All of you probably know this from all sorts of that shrinking glaciers, diminishing sea ice, thawing permafrost. All of these are impacts of climate change. Climate change also brings more extreme events. So that can include drought, which we had recently, extreme rainfall, wildfire, extreme heat, many others, which a lot of you have experienced. Wind is interestingly, it's still up in the air whether wind is related to climate, which, yeah, it's kind of because I've been hearing that from a lot of farmers that wind is increasing, and a lot of people have been. So the effects of climate change in Alaska and widespread, and over by 2100, temperatures are expected to rise another 2 to 15 degrees, and because of different climate scenarios. But things are getting warmer for sure. So how is climate change affecting Alaskan agriculture? So how are these things sort of tying into? So there are going to be challenges and opportunities with climate change in Alaska. So, producers in Alaska already contend with a lot of challenges, but as these temperatures can, what am I trying to say here? Sorry. Okay, sorry about that. Yeah, so as by 2100, the frost-free season is expected to extend by weeks. Degree days, I think I have a section about that. Yep, growing degree days are likely to double or by 2100. So things are going to be really different. So the growing season is likely to lengthen. Going to be a big shift in plant hardiness zones. So right now, Palmer, Alaska is zone 5A. And by 2100, expected to shift to zone 7A, which is the current zone in Boise, Idaho, and Kennewick, Washington. These are very different places. But we can do things to prepare for this. So in altered future, crop yields could improve or they could degrade. New varieties are probably going to be able to grow in Alaska, and more agricultural land could open up. But there's also the chance of an increased risk of weather associated with climate change, more intense storms, potential increase in invasive plants, insects. Oh, this sounds really bad. I'm realizing as I read this list. But like I said, now let's go on to wild harvest. So how is climate change affecting wild harvest? This is sort of summarized in one slide because there's a lot of different ways to wild harvest. There's a lot of different foods to wild harvest, but are, as you all know, a significant part of a lot of Alaska. They actually are the primary source of local food in Alaska, and they're being affected by. You can think of a lot of wild foods, probably salmon, walrus, seal, moose, caribou, sick deer. On average, 65%, 98% of rural Alaskans catch, hunt, or gather wild foods. But so climate change could impact the location and timing of patterns. We're seeing this with caribou in some instances. We're seeing this with moose move into new areas of the state. And that can make a hunting animal is more difficult. So for people like Alaskan have been hunting in the same areas for a long time, these places could shift, animal migrations could shift, that can impact. Coastal storms, Typhoon Merbach, early ice breakup, and other extreme events lead to unpredictable for wild harvesters, and that can put wild harvesters in danger and reduce access to critical food sources. Thinking of Merbach, time for harvesting, and Merbach came along and really disrupted a lot of people's food security for the year. So food storage facilities that rely on natural sellers, things like that, can also be affected by climate change as seawater inundates land, as permafrost thaws. So there are a lot of impacts. So I guess the good thing, the important thing to say about wild foods and agriculture is the are mixed for both. So we're not totally sure of what's going to happen, and that's what makes climate change and so difficult to study too, because we're kind of, it's all a lot of research, but we're trying to prepare for the future, which requires a lot of adaptability, and this can be for producers who are trying to meet a bottom line. The Northwest Climate Hub is working on in Alaska so that producers have a little bit more information about. And we do that sort of in a few different ways. Pages about climate change in Alaska. I wrote a curriculum, 10-minute talk about agriculture and climate change. Youth grades 6 to 12. Hours and in-person workshops, which I'll go into, adaptation workbooks and case studies. So all of these things hopefully fit together a good sort of place for information. So I'll go into the web pages first. What we try to do with the web pages is accessible as possible. Make it so people can get information to learn about, contact us if they want to. And yes, I will go through. I have some QR codes in here. Interested in any resources specifically, you can feel free to scan those at the end. That'll just take you to the website. So to talk about is Alaska and a changing climate. So this page is really just a general page that introduces climate impacts. And it's a good place to go if you have questions about like the things that are going to happen. What can we expect in the future and what's already. So it goes over basically what I talked about presentation, climate. The agriculture is a general page that goes over agricultural production, how climate change could impact agriculture. It's pretty general. It's very easy to read. It's not like a deep dive into climate change in agriculture. So if you're looking for that, I've got some other research. It also is one of our most popular on the Climate Hub website, which is kind of cool. Change in wild foods in Alaska. This goes over the impact of wild foods and some ways that people are adapting. Food security and climate change is the most recent one I've written. And I use the security report as one of my main sources for this page. Exciting to use. And it just kind of summarizes really dense information, and it's something I hope is accessible for people. And then we have so many more web pages. You guys, but climate change and wildfire in Alaska, seaweed farming, the storm is brewing, climate change and coastal storms. I like that because Murbach happened, and I was like, I need some for information about climate change in Western Alaska. So many more. We have pages about agrivoltaics, no-till farming. Some of them are more Northwest generic, so but it's also Idaho, Oregon, and Washington, but good information. This is the curriculum that I talked about earlier. So it was a partnership with Alaska FFA. It has 7 lessons on Alaskan water quality, where kids go out and test water quality in the field, on soils, so they actually do some soil testing and some texturing, and learn about how soils could change with climate change. And it kind of has everything that a teacher needs to go forth with this curriculum. So and there's a good resource for where to buy the water quality testing kits and all that stuff. So if you're interested in that kind of thing. We also have done drought workshops and webinars in Alaska. So some of you might know Holly Prendeville. She's the coordinator for the Northwest Hub, and she's been up here quite a few times to do these in-person drought workshops. So we had one in 2022. in Delta Junction and Palmer, which focused on how drought could impact agriculture in Alaska and how it has impacted it. And then we did an Alaska 2021 drought webinar series to make it a little more accessible during COVID. And then the 2019 Southeast Alaska Drought Workshop, which was kind of figuring out what like in Southeast Alaska, because it's a new thing, climate change. So this is sort of the crowning jewel of the climate agriculture world. Versus for agriculture, responding to changes in climate in Alaska. It sounds very sciencey and overwhelming. Actually quite pleasant to read, if I may say so myself. I didn't write it. It's a workbook that reviews climate change effects on agriculture. It's like deep. For a producer, I think it would be so cool to read. Just kind of learn about all of the different impacts of climate change and adaptation options, because it lists all of these. And it has some, I'll show you some examples of this, but there are a couple of case studies in the workbook. Went through the workbook and used it as a tool to implement climate change in their farms. And there's some sort of deliverables. So this is a really cool resource. It's like the case studies I talked about. I don't know if I have a pointer, but I'll just do this. And Ridgeway Farms in Kenai, those were associated with the adaptation workbook. These two farms used the adaptation workbook and implemented some no-till, some cover crops, and some soil health initiatives. Sort of in association with adapting to climate change and also trying to kind of get more product out of the land. This one, food security and justice at Calypso Farm, Alaska. Probably a lot of you guys work with Calypso or know Calypso. So we started a new series called Adaptation in Action, and that's where we talk to farmers, ranchers, foresters about climate adaptation work they're doing on the ground. And I talk about funding, climate impacts of concerns, challenges and opportunities. So hopefully these are for other farmers and farmers and want to be profiled. Reach out to them, because I would love to do that. We definitely would like to share more stories. Okay, here gonna work, but if this is like, but I just kind of was really curious what kind of information you understand or change in your or just in your life. Anything off the top of your head that's like, man, I really wish I understood this about climate change, or I really wish I had researched about this facet of climate change.
I'm a farmer. I work in the farm university.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like the climate. And the way is changing. Most people say that climate is turning
Mm-hmm.
however, the change is not happening uniformly. The change is happening in the same direction everywhere. Interior Alaska is different than Southwest, Southwest is different than South Central. And all this part, people are doing different. So my question is like, so does climate has any provide any kind of information as the plan to provide in the right? Like region specific seasonal weather prediction. So that will help farmer, like short term, obviously will help farmer to decide when to go to the field, with the sit down and harvest. For the long term, that will help farmer to decide what field the farmer will have to plan for him from 5 years, 10 years, down the line.
Yeah.
So that's my question.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I think that's probably, we have the Alaska Climate Hub fellow here. Amazing, famous, Erin. She's doing some Alaskan, well, she is doing work in Alaskan agriculture. I think that we're open to the ideas of partnering on projects. I think that might be more of a climate adaptation project, but yeah, but
I did some research on that. So, International Arctic Research Center, and they have a sister organization, they have a web or something. Over there, they state with some information for specific specific to the station and the areas around.
you're kind of thinking that, like, I think this is a great point, is information so it's actually regionally focused
Yes.
would be really helpful.
Yes, something will definitely. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's a great idea. Yeah. Yeah, right.
That would be a really great product. A lot more of a localized stream of data to the producer instead of. There's a huge array of technological variation. A mile radius in that Sioux Valley, they get the same exact valley.
Mhm.
And I mean, someone with the north face, but it's like, hello, they're not even gonna be able to plant someone else in the south, so.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I think that's definitely something I'll bring to my supervisors and Heidi, yeah.
Oh, well, I was just gonna say along those lines too, encourage someone encourage talking about. But it would be cool. You getting USDA to update their zone ordinance now.
Yeah,
Those are what.
certainly would.
2012. Earlier.
Yeah. This is all good stuff. Okay, got 2 minutes. Okay, I will remember these things. I'll write them down when I sit down. This is really good information. I think generally in Alaska, one of the challenges of climate change, there are a lot of challenges, but one of them is that there's just not a lot of data collection in Alaska. There's not a lot of people. It's just hard to get data. There's also not the resources to synthesize that data into something that's usable. Working on it, but this is really good information. I appreciate that. Yeah.
So I'm not really familiar with, I'm also in USDA.
Yeah.
I'm not familiar with much. Do you guys provide funding for trials and that kind of stuff? So you could get some of that localized data or?
Yeah, we funding agency, but we kind of for funding. So we fund research sometimes. To be honest, I don't really know how that works. I don't know who you even go to for that. But if you reach out to me, I can talk to my supervisor, and Polly Prendeville is a rock star. She knows everything. So we could help you with that. There are ways, we're so connected in the USDA that I think there are ways that we can make stuff like this happen, and we can fund, hopefully, like, it would be great if we could kind of update some of the, plant hardening zones, and we could make things more region specific. So, yeah.
Did you do some sort of, I don't know, sort of like citizen science program? Or your, I know it's not happening in person, but it would obviously all very. But like just start to, utilize people that are actually on the ground.
Yeah.
There's like a really piece of street like wave, just 40%.
Yeah, that'd be great. I think so short on time here, but that's a really good idea to try to get some citizen science. The hard thing with the hub is that we kind of have to partner to do all this on, like, with NRCS to do all this on the ground stuff, which is something we're totally willing to do. I mean, and Aaron works really closely with NRCS, so yeah, that's a great idea. Do I have time for one more? That's it. Okay. All right. Thank you guys so much.
Hi, everybody. Heidi Rader. I'm with the University of Alaska Fairbanks Cooperative Extension. Thank you for sticking around for the last session of the day, and thanks a great presentation. This is like the perfect follow, I feel like, because it's kind of, what can we do to adapt and or to mitigate climate change? So works out great. So I'd just like to acknowledge, we're on the traditional lands of Alaska Native Nations here. I just want to acknowledge that I work with extension and specifically serving tribes. So I've done a couple of presentations today. And, this one isn't specific, but reach out if you'd like a workshop similar to what I'm going to give, and also have lots of information on the internet. But today I'm going to talk specifically about ways you can farm or garden sustainably. And let's skip ahead here. So we'll talk different ways. And out in Igiagig, Alaska for the first time, wonderful community, and they've got great greenhouses there. And Jeff Bringhurst, if anyone went to his great things they're doing out there, he said, oh yeah, that presentation you gave, 8 ways you can garden or like, that's been really useful. I was like, oh, okay. Dig that out of my folder from whenever I gave that before, probably at another sustainable agriculture conference way back then. So I thought I'd give it again today. But wanted to go back to this slide. This is Calypso Farm, and Morgan mentioned she did a case study there. So I'm from Fairbanks. I grew up gardening in Fairbanks in a cabin with no running water. And my mom would grew these giant zucchini, which I hated at the time. But we used rain in the garden, and she pulled out some pretty amazing veggies from there. I worked at Ann's Green, worked at Calypso Farm and posting. Of course, they also do not have running water or a well system. They use rain catchment up there and collect water that way. That was one of my jobs, was hauling around the pumps and watering the crops that way. A lot of composting as well. And another thing I did during those days, I think I was a junior or so in college, and I was an intern up there, provide housing, which was a tent situation. So I chose to live with my parents, but at the time didn't have a car. And so it was about a 30-mile bike round trip there. So just, as we're talking about climate change, I just wanted to put in that plug that I did my part back then. Anymore, but it was cool to work up there and have that really sustainable farm going on, as well as back in the day when I biked everywhere. So that's definitely working up there informs some of these ideas around sustainability. And I like to, we talk about climate change more now, but we also talk about sustainable agriculture. And I think there's a lot of overlap there with climate adaptation and reducing our carbon footprint. So why might you want to garden or farm more sustainably? Yes, on that. Less money to buy plastic containers. Yeah, okay. That's a good one. Reduce microplastics and all that. Anybody else?
Just to be more climate friendly.
Yeah. Yeah, and I put up a bunch of reasons too. So if you read those, but save money. I mean, in a lot of ways we're both being sustainable, but it's also saving money. The Calypso Farm, again, they are masters of like never throwing anything away and repurposing things and getting the most out of each thing that they. I like to do that as well. So it's a way to save money, a way to grow food has fewer chemicals. probably more nutrients in it when you're using organic fertilizers. More nutritious, all of those good things. Habitat, more habitat for pollinators, birds, all of those things. Less money on fertilizers. I do have to confess, and this is another, I have a big garden and I've always grown organically as an adult, but this summer I bought a nice big bag of just conventional fertilizer because the prices of organic fertilizer went up and I didn't have a good local source of manure. And, to spend that much money on fertilizer that did come from elsewhere. So sometimes you do have to weigh those different pros and cons of, which things make sense. And I got really nice cucumbers this year, so I was excited about that. But I think I'm moving more towards a mixture of conventional and organic fertilizers. But I do compost and I would love to have a great source of manure too, but don't at this point. Just quickly too, who in the room is a gardener? What about a farm? Okay, great. Rotates their crops. Great. Okay, who's an organic farmer? Great. So reasons you might want to control diseases, use up some of those nutrients that you may not otherwise, if you grow the same thing in the same place every year, likely to reduce some of those diseases and pests you may find. Gooseberry here can talk to you a lot about that. He's with our integrated pest management program. And so he helps people identify pests and manage those pests and diseases. Do you have anything else to add to cover that? Okay. So here's a crop rotation example. General recommendation would be to do it on a 3-year schedule. And so you don't want to grow things in the same family in the same place every year. Some things I think can be a little tricky, like potatoes, because we recommend growing them with a lower pH, a little bit more acidic soil. And so rotating that in with your regular veggies, and you may not be meeting that. Definitely good to rotate in a cover crop if you can, or take a break from your potato area there for a bit. Brassicaceae, broccoli, cabbage, kale, that's all the same family. So if you want to rotate that with, maybe the squash family, that's cucumbers, squash, yellow squash, winter squash, all of those. So. Okay, another big one, reduce tillage, and that's one of your big recommendations too, right? The Wrigleys are really good about reducing tillage. I think they do practice no-till. If you do till, minimizing that as much as possible. Emily Garrity with Twitter Creek Farms, she has some really good YouTube videos on how she preps her beds with minimizing the tilling and just tills the very top. If you're growing in a raised bed, you can just use a broad fork, lightly loosen the soil. You don't need to till it.
Butter.
You get a lot of weeds in a garden. It is nice just to get that rototiller in there and break up those roots and get them out of there. But if you don't need to do it, don't over-till. And another important thing with that is you want to wait long enough in the spring to where your soil dries out. Do some of you have issues with your soil ever drying out, like in Southeast? Yeah. Yeah. How do you deal? Do you just go ahead and till when?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, if you live in a wetter area, you can do all you can to minimize. Good. But of course, you can have a lot of weeds growing in Southeast too. So that's tough. Okay, growing cover crops. Anybody grow cover crops? Okay. Nice. And are you able to grow, do you grow in the summer or do you grow into the fall, or do you just take a break from your growing area when you grow them? Okay. Yeah, in the lower 48, you'll see a lot of the recommendations have to do with their situation, which is they can grow in the late fall and winter, and so they're not really sacrificing their growing area. So here, I've seen some people will grow in the aisles, and then they'll kind of rotate their crops that way. But it can be tough if you have a base and you have to take a break and just grow a cover crop there. That I think that's an area where we could use some more research as well, and figure out, you know, what's the ideal regime for growing cover crops. But reasons to grow a cover crop can fix nitrogen. You know, I think about if you're out in a village, shipping out fertilizer versus seed. Seed is lighter, and so you're actually bringing in a lot of nutrients to your farm. So that's a great way to do it. You can suppress other weeds. You can raise the pH of your soil, increase a lot of that mycorrhizal fungi activity, increase your beneficial insects. So that's a good one. Again, we've got Calypso Farm is a good example of growing a lot of cover crops successfully, and different mixtures grown on. So usually you want to plant maybe a legume and a grass in combination, and then you'll have your legume climbing up your grass and supporting it, and just get a really productive cover crop growing on. We also have some trials of cover crops at the university, so keep your eyes open for that. Really cover crops for a new garden too, and just break up some of that soil, nutrients, and fungi activity in there. Two types, you know, you generally want two types of cover crop. You do want to think and kill it. I also have seen some examples of grow it in the aisles, and their cover crop will be so annual rye is actually an example of that. So you don't want to let it go to seed. You want to be able to kill it, and kill it by tilling it, herbicide, winter kill for some of those crops too, but not all of them. So red clover is a good one. Field peas, hairy vetch, all site clover. Those all are good choices. Annual rye, really easy to establish, pull, and yeah, difficult to kill. So okay, but along those lines, definitely aware and cautious of any invasive species you might be bringing in. So still the right site might have changed by now. We keep just Google invasive species Alaska, and you'll pull up the list of invasive species. So bird vetch, anybody familiar with that? In the Fairbanks was brought in by the university, and probably a cover crop or a crop for livestock, and that's species, but it does fix nitrogen, and it acts as a cover crop at one point, but very invasive, so watch out for that. And another site I like to use to figure out if something's invasive, plants.usda.gov. You can figure out if it was brought in or if it's native and what the range is too. And that's another great thing Gooseberry pest management program can help you out with. They can help you ID plants and weeds and figure out what it is and how to manage it. So you can upload the photo right on the website and they'll help you out there. So cover crops also bring in beneficial, as do a lot of other plants. So I like to integrate with my veggies. I know we're used to seeing like vegetables and then flowers separately, but really good idea to mix those in. And what beneficial insects will do is, you know, they'll help control those pests. And I don't know about you, but in the last few years, I've noticed fewer just a variety of bugs in my yard. And I live kind of in town, and I know a lot of people spray for mosquitoes, and along with spraying for mosquitoes, you're actually spraying a lot of beneficial insects too. So you're controlling your mosquitoes. Think about using the magnet, much more targeted control method for that versus all of your beneficials. And if we don't have those, then we've got big outbreaks of aphids and all kinds of things. So
A teaspoon,
it's always
2
nice to
cups of
see it
flour,
first, bugs and beneficials, and one of the
soda
biggest
salt.
things is not killing things inadvertently. So seen a lot more wasps with control pests too, but of course they're a bit pesky as well. So there's just growing flowers and with your veggies. The beneficials you can grow, some of those big showy sunflowers, yarrow, let your brassicas well. So alyssa, sturds, yellow rocket, lots in the umbelliferae family, cilantro, dill, fennel, all kinds of good stuff. Cover crops. And then another great thing is just learning to identify six. I don't know if you can see this, but it's a ladybug larvae, but you know, lots of people don't know that, and they may try to kill that because they think it's a pest. So, but that'll actually eat a lot. That's why you go to the greenhouse and you buy a bag of ladybugs to help control some of those pests. And of course, there's beneficial insects you can buy, different things as well, if you don't find them in your yard and farm. Damsel bug. Okay, so we talked a little bit about this, but yeah, organic fertilizers are great, particularly if you can get them locally, and we can't always get them locally. And I said this earlier, but one of the things I do is I teach workshops, and I used to bring out composting worms to villages, and we do composting. Of course, now there's talk that maybe composting worms could be invasive, so I'm a little hesitant to take those too far and wide, but I've gone to the store before and seen worm poop for sale, and it's like 0.001 concentration of nitrogen, and it was shipped all the way across the US up to Fairbanks. And to me, that's not particularly sustainable, and that's not reducing the carbon footprint, even though yes, it's organic, but it took a lot of airline miles to get here. And so local is best, and you know, if you can't get local fertilizers, sometimes I think it's better just to use that conventional chemical fertilizer. It's a little more economical, and their short growing season, sometimes I feel like some plants like squash in particular, or cucumbers, they just need a little more nutrients than we can their organic fertilizers. So I think it's good to consider it as an option, and weigh the pros and cons of how far you're shipping it, and the environmental costs, and cost to your pocketbook as well. if you can raise livestock with your garden or farm, that's a great option too. We've been doing winter squash trials up in Fairbanks for the past, I think a really good combo for food security is to have maybe goats and winter squash. So you've got some extra winter squash, feed them to your livestock, and you've got a little circle going on. The other really cool thing about winter squash for food security is you don't have to can it, you don't have to freeze it, you don't have to freeze dry it. You can put it on your counter and it keeps for months. It's pretty amazing. And you don't need a root cellar like you would for potatoes or carrots. So integrate, have it. If you have livestock, especially in a remote community, the feed is very expensive and you're shipping the feed long distances. So it's a potentially good combo. And that's, I think, when we're talking about sustainable gardening and farming, we have to think about all of the inputs and trying to minimize the outside inputs too. You can actually over fertilize with your manure, with your organic fertilizers too. So just keeping that in mind, if you can get a soil test to really figure out, are you fertilizing enough or too much? That's a good thing to do every couple of years as well. So having a vague idea too of how much nutrients are in different manures is a good thing too. It's going to vary a lot as well. So you can actually get the manure tested to figure out exactly how much is in it. I don't know if any of you know Andy Harper. He's a strawberry farmer up in Fairbanks, and he actually gets tissue analysis on his strawberries every summer as well to really dial in his fertilizer amounts too. So good idea not to over fertilize, and that can happen at any point in the year, depending on if you're fertilizing in the spring or however you do it. So that's a really good way to make sure you're not wasting fertilizer or not fertilizing enough. Chicken tractors is a good way to spread out your manure and also take advantage of your cover crop too.
I saw that summer, like, the chicken factor, but I say no.
Yeah, so it's basically a little cage and you move it around on your field, and the idea is that you don't have to clean a chicken coop, and your manure is, you don't have to shovel manure, so it's kind of a win-win.
But
Oh, what?
wet manure, because the chicken.
Oh, sure, yeah, so
Okay.
you would kind of let it cure in the field and not plant on it right away, but conserve water. Drip irrigation is a good way to conserve water. Catching water is, the water you get from rain or snow is going to generally be, have fewer things you may not want in the garden. Also warmer is another advantage too. I think conserving water is going to become more and more of an issue with climate change as well. And just lawns in general, I think I like to think of growing food in my yard versus a lawn. Lawns take a lot of water, take a lot of just energy, mowing it, controlling it, and they're not really providing much of a habitat for beneficial insects. They're not providing food for us. So growing food instead of a yard or a yard, I think is always a sustainable option, particularly in suburban type settings. Yeah, limiting harmful chemicals. I think that's important for both the food that you are eating as well as, again, beneficial insects. Anytime you use a pesticide, you may inadvertently harm some of those beneficials in your yard and landscape, so. Limiting those uses, and by practicing some of those other ways of sustainable gardening will hopefully help you not need so much chemicals to control pests and diseases, so. I mentioned this a couple times, but our program, the integrated pest management program, is basically approaches it like you know, what level of pest and disease can you tolerate? And then, you know, do you have to completely eradicate pests? Because by doing that, then you may have run into more problems on down the line, so. Grow a diversity, that's always a good thing to do. And think of your landscape or your garden or your farm as more of an ecosystem and supporting the entire ecosystem, so. I didn't include my information, but I'm Googleable, Heidi Rader, if you have questions. Service. I have a blog called It Grows in Alaska, and a lot of information on that, as well as some YouTube videos too. So if you have pest questions, we can help you with that. And if you're with the tribe, we'll come out and do a workshop. So that's what we have to offer. So thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Got a couple of minutes if anybody's got
Okay.
questions.
Yeah, sorry, I meant to say that. Oh, and one more thing too, we collect demographic data at the university when we do presentations, so if you wouldn't mind filling out the form, I'd appreciate the ends of the rows there, so.
What if we've already said no? Do you want to say?
Yes, sorry.
No, that's good.
Yeah, any questions? Yeah, go ahead.
So you don't want to like put on more fertilizers than you need. I'm wondering
Exactly.
if there's like a cooperative extension handout or something that talks about fertilizer needs for specific crops. You're planting an entire row of broccoli. Is there like a recommendation of how much you should put on for the broccoli as opposed to carrots?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know that it would be pretty, as far as we recommend, we probably wouldn't get too specific on each crop, but it would be more like vegetables or peonies. And we've actually just recently done some work on our soil testing website. And so we have recommendations on that. That's the place to start, because it's hard to know how much you would need to add because we don't know what's there unless you get your soil tested. But you will see jobs out there, but that's usually where we recommend starting, is get your soil tested, and then you'll actually get a recommendation of which type of fertilizer, how much of which types of fertilizer to add, and it could be organic or conventional. And a conventional fertilizer, you know, one might have 83216 NPK, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. One might have 888. So it depends on what fertilizer you're using and what's in your soil. So that's where I would start. Yep.
One question on is covered main project so that the field is profit and the capital in the ground. However, Alaska climate is very different than not long enough to grow a field or component. So my question is like, shall we be talking about like the cover using cover crop, of which we could use the term more like crop rotation, like year one you have your regular crop, year two you have the crop that is completely different, like this way. The idea is that the rotational crop will protect the soil, improve soil, nutrition, at the same time, it will take, it will be benefit as produce.
I think that's a good idea. That is probably a little more clear. I've heard the term catch crop too, and then that would, you know, if you grow that in the fall, then it's like catching the nutrients. Cover crop. I don't know, I guess I hadn't thought about it specifically. That's just more commonly what I've heard, but yeah, I think it really is like a rotational crop, like you're saying, because we're not growing it in the fall so much to catch those nutrients and protect it from the winter, like a cover crop would do in the lower 48. Possibly in southeast or milder areas, it could, and particularly with heavy rains in the fall, it could act like that, but not so much. We were skiing in Fairbanks like early October this year, so it was a pretty quick changeover for us, but it just snowed here, right? So, I mean, in theory, what's that?
I did, but it's been too cold.
Okay, yeah. But those heavy rains, I mean, it really would be good to have something growing in the winter or fall, but you'd have to get it established probably, I don't know, early August, late July. So you could grow something early spring and then switch it over.
I've often heard it called green manure.
Yeah, that's true. Okay. Yeah, that's probably a little more accurate. Any other questions? Great, well, thank you.